I'm going to write a first-person narrative from the perspective of Eleanor that meets your requirements before the gates closed, before the rain turned my lilies into something less beautiful, before Lauren's scorn echoed a church bell calling others to witness my humiliation. My life was made up of small submissions. I am Eleanor Weissman, 60 years old, although my hands still work with the precision I held as a seamstress in my mother's shop. After Jonathan, a quiet widower of years, proposed to me while I was still young, I set aside needle and thread to weave myself into the fabric of his life. His first wife had been a force of nature, leaving behind large rooms and a daughter who inherited all her wildness, yet without her grace. I did not enter their lives as a replacement, but as a careful mender of small tears. I cooked the meals Jonathan actually ate, attended the school events Lauren ignored, and managed the household ledgers with a precision Jonathan appreciated. I was not as beautiful as his first wife, but I was useful, reliable, the kind of woman who noticed when his favorite shirt needed mending or his morning coffee grew cold. For 30 years, I lived on the edges of his success, the footnotes of his achievements. While he designed buildings that made headlines, I curated a home that made him happy. I watched Lauren evolve from a bitter teenager to an even more bitter adult, who rendered my kindness invisible. When she married and had her son Will, I was allowed to take the role of the babysitter, never the grandmother. I sewed blankets that she later gave away without my knowledge. I baked birthday cakes that she replaced with store-bought ones. Every small blow taught me to make myself smaller, until I was almost transparent in my own life. It began to rain as I stood before the wrought iron gates of Oceanview Cemetery. Heavy drops beat down on the gravestones with a sound like distant applause. My black gloves were already soaked. The lilies trembled as my hands shook, not from cold, but from the realization of what was happening. Lauren stood right behind the gate in a black dress that cost more than my entire wardrobe. Her brown hair was perfect despite the weather, her makeup flawless, even as tears, real or feigned, I could never tell with her, streamed down her cheeks. Behind her, black-clad figures moved like chess pieces toward the chapel, where Jonathan awaited his final ceremony. "Excuse me," I said quietly, stepping forward. "I have to go inside." Lauren turned around slowly. Her green eyes, Jonathan's eyes, scrutinized me from head to toe. "Eleanor," she said, my name tasting bitter. "What are you doing here?" My heart began that old familiar beat that started every time Lauren looked at me as if I were intruding on my own life. "I am here for Jonathan's funeral." "No." The word was plain, final. "You do not belong to us." Other mourners slowly approached, pretending not to look while leaning in to catch every word. I recognized neighbors, Jonathan's business partners, people who had eaten at our table, praised my roast, and inquired about my garden. Now they watched as I was excluded from my own husband's funeral, as if it were an unfortunate play they could not look away from. "Lauren, please," I said. "I am his wife." "You were his wife," she corrected, "and you are not welcome here. This is for the family only." The word family struck me like ice water. After 30 years, after every meal prepared, every shirt ironed, every lonely night, Jonathan worked late, and I stayed awake just to say goodnight. "I have every right. You have no rights here." Lauren stepped closer. Her voice lowered to a hiss. "You were a convenience, a housekeeper he married. When my mother died, something in him died. You were just the warm body that filled the space." She stepped back and raised her voice again for the audience. "I am sorry, Eleanor, but I cannot allow you to disrupt this solemn occasion. This is about honoring my father's memory, not your need for attention." The crowd shifted uneasily. Some looked at their phones, pretending to have heard nothing. Sigrid, my neighbor, stood by the chapel steps with an expression of shock and compassion. "Yet no one moved to help me." No one contradicted Lauren's version of reality. My throat felt like sandpaper, but I forced the words out. "Jonathan would have wanted me here." "Jonathan," Lauren said slowly, savoring each syllable. "He shared everything with me. His work, his dreams, his finances. If he had wanted you here, he would have said so, but he did not." She smiled, sharp and triumphant. "Do you know what he told me? That he was tired. Tired of pretending, tired of playing the happy family when nothing could ever replace what we lost." The rain changed from drops into needles, but I barely felt them. The lilies in my hands, white because they were Jonathan's favorite flowers, began to fall, their petals crushed against my black wool coat. I had spent the morning arranging them, remembering how Jonathan once said they reminded him of purity and new beginnings. When we married, we planted an entire bed behind the house. "Please," I heard myself whisper. "Just 10 minutes to say goodbye." Lauren's laughter was the music of a broken instrument. 10 minutes? You had 30 years to say goodbye. Every night you could have told him. Every morning when you served him breakfast. You had your time. She pointed at the mourners who walked past us, averting their gaze. These people understand quality. They understand achievement. They understand why someone like my father would, in his last hours, want no reminders of his compromise. The word floated in the damp air like fog. Compromise. That was what our married life had been to her. All my silent devotion reduced to a single cutting word. I looked past her to the chapel where Jonathan lay. My mind was flooded with memories. His hand on mine as we signed our marriage certificate. His grateful smile when I learned his favorite recipes. The way he thoughtfully held my hand when we watched television. Had those moments meant so little to him as Lauren suggested? Or had she rewritten our history with her own ink? "You should go now," Lauren said, her tone almost gentle, as if speaking to a child, "before you embarrass yourself further." Behind her, I caught a glimpse of Will, Lauren's son, who always called me Eleanor, never Grandma, but with kindness in his voice. He stood at the entrance of the chapel, shifting from foot to foot. His 24-year-old face reflected the conflict he must have been feeling. As our eyes met, he shrugged apologetically before looking away. The rain beat harder on the umbrella someone held over me. Sigrid had moved closer, shielding me without intervening. Her presence gave me enough strength to do what I had practiced my whole life, to preserve dignity despite rejection. I placed the lilies on the ground directly in front of the gate, positioning them carefully on the wet grass. The water immediately began to soak the wrapping paper, but I took my time, making sure they looked as beautiful as possible, even in their abandonment. "Beautiful flowers," Lauren commented, watching my careful placement. "Too bad you will never see where they truly belong. Inside, where the family pays their tribute." She paused, letting the words take effect. "Where you will never set foot again." I stood up slowly, my knees protesting the movement. At 60, the sorrow made every pain clearer. Most of the mourners had filed past us, leaving Lauren and me at the gates with Sigrid, who maintained a respectful distance. "I loved him," I said simply. "I loved him." Lauren raised her eyebrows. "Oh, Eleanor, you were his comfort, his habit, his safe choice when he was too broken to choose better. Do not confuse gratitude with love." She turned away. Her heels clattered on the stone path as she walked away. Yet she called back without making an effort to lower her voice. "Enjoy your house, Eleanor. Make yourself a tea. Watch the afternoon soap operas. Live the life that is left to you. Because this," she pointed to the funeral, the cemetery, the gathering of mourners, "is not something you belong to." I stood in front of the gates as Lauren disappeared into the chapel. The rain soaked my coat, turning my carefully styled hair into a gray tangle, making my black shoes squeak with every small movement. The mourners continued to pretend they did not notice me, although I caught whispered words carried by the wind. It always seemed strange to me how different it was when his first wife was alive. "Lauren will have her reasons." Sigrid finally approached, the umbrella extended to protect me. "Eleanor, dear, let us take you home. We will make hot tea, put on dry clothes." But I did not move. In my pocket, I felt the weight of something Lauren did not know, something that straightened my spine, despite the rain, despite the humiliation, despite the 30 years I had been treated as a compromise. "Not yet," I said softly to Sigrid. "I have something to do afterward." She looked at me curiously, but nodded. As we walked back to her car, I touched the envelope again. Legal paper in a waterproof pocket, with Jonathan's initials on the seal and H.W., Henry Wohl, his lawyer, written in the corner. The funeral would take an hour. The reception afterward at the house would begin. Henry had instructions to read the will at 3 o'clock in front of all the mourners who had excluded me. Lauren did not know it. None of them knew it. But in an hour, everything would change. At 3 o'clock, I arrived at the house that I had called my home for 30 years. The grand Victorian house stood proudly on its hill, the porch decorated with black banners for the occasion. Cars lined the circular driveway. BMWs, Mercedes, the kind of vehicles that matched Jonathan's professional circle. I parked my modest sedan next to Sigrid's car, grateful that she had insisted on accompanying me. "Do not forget," she said as we approached the door. "You belong here, more than half of these people." Lauren opened the door herself. Her eyes widened when she saw me. Then they narrowed into slits. "Henry Wohl asked me to be here," I said simply. "For the reading of the will." Lauren paused, recalculating. "There is no formal reading planned. We are handling the will privately later this week." "Henry specifically said 3, I insisted. "Perhaps you should clarify that with him." Before she could reply, Henry himself appeared behind her, his silver hair immaculate as always, his 3-piece suit perfectly pressed. "Ah, Eleanor, right on time. I mentioned this morning that we must read Jonathan's will this afternoon." "There was a misunderstanding," Lauren said quickly. "We should do it another day." "Privately?" "Jonathan's instructions were very clear," Henry interrupted. "The entire family and the principal beneficiaries must be present. That includes Eleanor." Behind Lauren, I could see Will in the hallway watching us. Other mourners had gathered in the living room, glasses in hand, speaking softly, which hushed as they noticed our conversation. "Principal beneficiary?" Lauren's voice held an amused undertone. "Eleanor does not need to be present for that discussion." Henry adjusted his glasses. "I think you will find, Lauren, that your father's recent revisions will surprise you." The first crack appeared in Lauren's facade. She looked back and forth between Henry and me, then forced a laugh. "Recent revisions? My father discussed everything with me. There are no revisions." "Let us go to the library," Henry suggested. "I think Jonathan would have wanted this handled with dignity and privacy." Lauren reluctantly stepped aside. Her gaze bored into me as I passed. The familiar smell of the house, beeswax and old books, enveloped me like a forgotten embrace. Nothing had changed since Jonathan's death 2 days ago, yet everything felt different. In the library, Henry set chairs in a semicircle before Jonathan's mahogany desk. About 20 people entered the room. Business partners, close friends, distant relatives. Lauren sat in the front row, Will next to her, increasingly uncomfortable. I chose a seat in the back next to Sigrid. From there, I could see everyone's faces as Henry prepared. "Before we begin," Henry announced, "I want to note that this is an unusual situation. Jonathan insisted that his will be read aloud before witnesses to avoid any later confusion or disputes." He paused. His gaze rested on Lauren. He was very specific in this regard. Lauren maintained her self-assured smile, but I noticed how her manicured fingers gripped the armrest of her chair. She had no idea what was coming. None of them knew, except Will, who caught my eye and gave me a small, encouraging nod. Henry opened the folder containing Jonathan's last will. The room fell silent as he began to read in his measured lawyer's voice. "I, Jonathan Weissman, being of sound mind and body." The introductory phrases washed over the group. Lauren's posture remained perfect, her chin slightly raised, as if already accepting her inheritance. I thought of all the times I had supported her from the shadows, her Ivy League applications that she never acknowledged, preparing her nursery for her visits with Will, maintaining family traditions that she took for granted. Henry continued reading. His voice grew stronger as he reached the crucial sections. "To my daughter Lauren, I leave my love and the understanding that I failed in many ways. The education and opportunities I gave her were important, but they came at the cost of her emotional honesty. I leave her her mother's jewelry collection and a trust fund of $500,000, which shall be dispersed once she accepts the following truth. My stepmother Eleanor was never my second choice, but my redemption." The room stirred. Whispers began. Lauren's smile froze on her face. Henry took a deep breath and continued. "To my beloved wife Eleanor, who lived in the shadow of my own cowardice, I leave everything else. The house on Harbor Street, my architecture firm, including all intellectual property and client contracts, my investment portfolio, and my personal possessions. She deserves not only my love but my deepest respect for 30 years of grace under the heaviest burden I imposed upon her, being loved by a man too afraid to publicly defend that love." The silence that followed was absolute. Everyone turned to look at me, some with astonishment, others with dawning comprehension. Lauren's face was ashen, her green eyes wide with disbelief. "That is impossible," she whispered. "He told me." But her words broke off as she grasped the magnitude. Henry was not finished. He continued reading about minor bequests to staff and charities. But the battle was already won. Or perhaps, I realized, as Lauren finally turned to look directly at me, it had just begun. The silence that followed was absolute. Everyone turned to me, some with astonishment, others with dawning comprehension. Lauren's face was ashen, her green eyes wide with disbelief. "That is impossible," she whispered. "He told me." But her words broke off as she grasped the magnitude. Henry was not finished yet. He continued reading about smaller bequests to servants and charities. But the fight was already won. Or perhaps I realized, as Lauren finally turned around to look directly at me, it had only just begun. From the other side of the room, her voice broke through the murmurs. "You did this. Somehow you manipulated him for 30 years. Will spoke softly but firmly. "Let Henry Wohl finish reading." Henry looked at me over his glasses, a question in his eyes. I nodded slightly, and he took another document that he had placed under the will. "Jonathan also left a letter which is to be read aloud at this time," Henry announced. He wrote it 1 week before his death, and with these words, Jonathan's voice, preserved in his careful handwriting, would finally speak the truth he had been too afraid to say in life. A truth that would change everything Lauren believed about our marriage, about me, about the 30 years I had spent proving that my love needed no spotlight to truly shine. Henry cleared his throat and began to read Jonathan's letter. His voice, usually steady, trembled slightly at the words. "If you are hearing this, I have already gone. Lauren, my daughter, I owe you an apology that I should have made 30 years ago. When your mother died, I was lost. Eleanor found me in my grief and brought me back to life. But I was too afraid of losing you to give her the place in our family that she deserved. Every time you belittled her meals, ignored her kindness, or made her invisible, I should have spoken up. Instead, I let Eleanor carry the weight of my cowardice. She never demanded acknowledgement, never demanded my defense, but she deserved both. Eleanor saved me twice, first from sadness, and then from the shame of letting you live like a shadow in your own married life. I leave you everything not as payment, but as the legacy your love should have earned a long time ago." The paper rustled as Henry folded it. Some dared to look between Lauren and me. Will had moved to the edge of his chair, watching his mother anxiously. "There is one final provision," Henry continued. "Jonathan stipulated that Eleanor receive immediate access to all accounts and property titles. The transition is immediately effective." "No," Lauren jumped up. Her chair scraped across the wooden floor. "That is not legal." Her voice broke not from grief, but from the sound of a certainty falling to pieces. "I am his daughter, his blood." 30 years. The words escaped me before I could stop them, surprising everyone, especially myself. All eyes turned to me as I slowly stood up, my spine rigid. 30 years you treated me like an employee. 30 years you let your father's guests hear your derision while I washed the dishes. 30 years you taught your son to call me Eleanor while you called your friends aunt and uncle. Lauren's face reddened. "You have no idea what it was like to lose my mother and see my father replace her with someone who helped him find happiness again." I interrupted, my voice steady. "Someone who raised your son when you were too busy with your social life. Someone who ran your father's house, organized his appointments, prepared his lunches with the same care, whether anyone noticed or not." The room was silent again. Sigrid nodded encouragingly at me, while Will looked at his mother with something new in his eyes. Perhaps understanding, perhaps disappointment. His partners were ready to dissolve the firm, Lauren said, her voice barely a whisper. He had realtors ready to put this house up for sale. She swallowed. He had plans. Jonathan did too, Henry interjected softly. Lauren sank back into her chair, staring at her hands. The mourners began to stir. Some excused themselves to leave. Others offered me quiet condolences as they passed. "Mrs. Weissman, Eleanor, if you would not mind," Henry said gently. "I need your signature on a few documents. Perhaps we could use Jonathan's study." I looked at Lauren one more time. She sat completely still, but I could see her calculating, planning. looking for options. This was not over for her, I knew that. Yet for the first time in 30 years, I did not fear her next move. Will stood up, his voice breaking the tension. I want to say something. Everyone turned to him. I have seen my whole life how Eleanor was treated as if she did not belong here. My mother told me stories about how Eleanor stole my grandfather's heart, how she was not really family. He walked over to me and stood beside me, but Eleanor was the one who taught me to ride my bike. She was the one who stayed awake with me during thunderstorms. She was the one who came to every school performance when my mother was in New York. Will, Lauren warned, but he continued undeterred. His next words would change the family dynamic forever, whether anyone was ready or not. I am 24 years old and I have seen my whole life how the wrong woman was treated as an outsider. He looked directly at Lauren. Maybe it is time we recognized who really earned their place here, and who simply inherited it. The silence that followed was different from before. Not shocked, but thoughtful, Lauren stood up abruptly and walked to the door, stopping only to make one final statement that would echo in my mind for days. This is not over, Eleanor. Blood is thicker than ink. As she left, taking some of Jonathan's partners with her, I felt Sigrid's gentle hand on my arm. Let us sign the papers. I believe you have a business to run. For the first time since I arrived, I smiled. Jonathan had left me more than just property. He had given me the freedom to finally step into the light. In Jonathan's study, while I signed one document after another, transferring everything to my name, I thought of his letter. He had finally understood what I had always known, that love does not need witnesses to be real, but respect does. And respect, once earned through silence, speaks louder when it finally finds its voice. There is one more thing, Henry said, reaching into his briefcase. Jonathan left this for you personally. He handed me a small box. Inside was my grandmother's ruby ring, the one I had sold to pay for Lauren's art therapy when she was 16. The one I had told Jonathan had been stolen. Beneath it was a note in his handwriting. I knew. I always knew. Forgive me for waiting so long to give you what you deserved from the start. The weight of 30 years fell away from me, not all at once, but enough to breathe better than I had in decades. The post-funeral reception continued around us, but I was exactly where I needed to be. Finally, after so many years, I took my rightful place in my own life. The days ahead would bring challenges, as Lauren contested the will, as I learned to run the architecture firm, as I figured out what it meant to live without the constant hum of resentment. But today, as the rain continued to beat against the study windows and Sigrid squeezed my hand, I allowed myself to feel something I had forgotten. Hope. The house was mine now. The life was mine. And most importantly, I could finally tell the truth. As I stepped out of Jonathan's study with Henry's final documents, the full significance of what had happened became apparent to me. The house, the firm, Jonathan's private collection of architectural sketches that I had always admired. It all belonged to me now. Yet the inheritance felt less like receiving and more like reclaiming what should have been mine from the beginning. Next week, I will meet the partners of the firm, I said to Henry as we returned to the main living room. The crowd had significantly thinned. Only a handful of close friends and relatives remained. Lauren stood by the front door, her mascara slightly smeared. When she saw me, she straightened, as if preparing for a final battle. I want you to know, she said, her voice firm, but without the poison from before, that I will contest this. It is clear that my father was not in his right mind when I stopped directly in front of the door, close enough that only the inner circle could hear. Jonathan spoke with Henry 3 weeks ago. He was lucid. It was intentional, and he had been planning this for a long time. Her shoulders slumped slightly, but she nodded. You understand. This house, the firm, that is my legacy, my birthright. For the first time, I looked at her not with the exhaustion of 3 decades, but with clear simplicity. Your legacy was the love of a father who gave you every advantage, every opportunity. My legacy was earning the respect of that father through daily acts of devotion that you never acknowledged. Will stepped forward and gently placed a hand on his mother's arm. Mom, let us go. We can talk about this later. Just one thing, Lauren said as Will led her toward the door. Did you always know he would do this? I knew nothing of the will, I answered honestly. But I always knew that I loved your father for who he was. A brilliant architect, a grieving widower, and yes, a man too afraid to defend his second marriage. I loved him completely. That, Lauren, is what your father finally acknowledged in the end. She nodded once, a sign I could not interpret, and let Will guide her out. In the doorway, she turned back to me one last time. Eleanor, may I call you sometime? Maybe invite you for lunch next week. I would like that very much, Will, I said. As they left, Sigrid appeared at my side with my coat. What a day for you. 30 years, I corrected. The departing mourners offered a mixture of sympathy and congratulations. Everyone processed the day's revelations in their own way. Some had witnessed Lauren's indifference toward me over the years. Others were seeing our family dynamic clearly for the first time. When the house was finally empty except for Sigrid, Henry, and me, I walked through the rooms I had tended for 30 years. The living room where I had organized Lauren's engagement party, carefully arranging the flowers while she told guests I had a good eye for household things. The dining room where I had served countless Thanksgiving dinners, watching from the kitchen door as Jonathan carved the turkey, while Lauren held court at the other end of the table. What are you going to do? Sigrid asked when she found me in the kitchen, standing at the familiar sink, running my hands over the copper fixtures I had polished weekly. I am keeping the house, I said. Jonathan's firm needs leadership, and I know his work better than most people think. But first, I stepped to the window that overlooked the garden. First, I'm going to plant these lilies, right where they can be seen from the breakfast nook, the ones from the cemetery gate and the ones I will buy tomorrow. White lilies, an entire bed. The afternoon light faded as Henry prepared to leave. I will have all the papers ready by Monday. The firm's partners have already been informed. Some will be surprised how much you know about architectural law and project management. I smiled, remembering all the nights I had helped Jonathan with proposals, organized his filing system, and learned his coding methods. It is amazing what people do not notice when they only consider someone useful. When they were gone, I stood in the hallway, looking at my reflection in the centuries-old mirror that Jonathan's first wife had hung. The woman who looked back was not the humiliated figure who had been turned away at the cemetery that morning. She was someone I was just getting to know, Eleanor Weissman, defined not by the shadows she had lived in, but by the light she had preserved despite everything. My phone buzzed. A message from Will. I told Mom the truth about how often you visited me at school, about the money you secretly sent. She said nothing, just stared out the window for a long time. Perhaps there is hope, I replied simply. There is always hope, dear. The sunset painted the harbor in gold and rose tones as I walked through every room, touching the furniture I had chosen, the pictures I had hung, the memories I had created in spaces where I had been treated like a guest. Tomorrow, the practical task of running Jonathan's firm would begin. Next week, likely Lauren's legal challenges. But tonight, I allowed myself simply to exist in my own house, where the doorbell would no longer summon me to my own humiliation, where the kitchen finally belonged entirely to me, where the story of our family could finally be fully told. Before going to sleep, I visited Jonathan's study one last time and sat down at his drafting table, where the sketches of his last project lay unfinished. He had designed a community center when he became ill, a space where art classes, reading groups, and workshops could bring people of different generations together. I picked up his charcoal pencil, which was still lying where he had left it, and wrote on the edge of his drawing, "To be completed, in memory of my love." Tomorrow, I would ensure the project continued. It seemed fitting that Jonathan's last building should be one that builds bridges instead of maintaining divisions. The rain had stopped, leaving the world clean and shiny. Through the window, I saw the moon rise over the harbor, painting a silver path on the dark water. It reminded me of something Jonathan had said at the beginning of our marriage. The best architecture does not fight the landscape. It finds its place in it. For 30 years, I had tried to find my place in his landscape, adapting to the spaces created by loss and resentment. Tonight, I understood that I had not been trying to fit into his architecture. I had been building something entirely new, a structure that could finally stand for itself. On Monday morning, new challenges arrived as the letter from Lauren's lawyer arrived before my coffee was ready. The words blurred. Undue influence, mental capacity, rightful inheritance. Yet the threat was clear. I put the letter aside and dressed for my first official day at Weissman and Partner Architects. The office had not changed since Jonathan's death. His coffee cup was still on the desk, a half-finished project pinned to the wall. His secretary, Patricia, looked up as I entered. "Mrs. Weissman," she hesitated. I was not sure. "Call me Eleanor, please," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. For 3 hours, Patricia guided me through active projects, contracts, and meetings with a patience I had not expected. By noon, I understood why Jonathan had insisted on an immediate transition. 2 important projects required signatures that only I could now give. My phone rang just as Patricia left for lunch. "Lauren, meet me at the Belmont Cafe in an hour. We need to talk privately." The cafe was almost empty at 1 o'clock. Lauren had chosen a corner table. 2 untouched glasses of water waited. She looked aged overnight, dark circles under careful makeup. Her fingers drummed restlessly. "I had breakfast with Henry's partner this morning," she began without preamble. "The will is watertight. Father's mental capacity was extensively documented, but I can make it hard for you. The firm's partners might not accept your leadership easily. Father's clients might hesitate. The community knows you as his quiet wife, not as his business partner." I finally spoke. "What do you want, Lauren?" "Of the firm, the Vineyard father bought in Tuscany, and that changes nothing between us. You are still not family." I looked closely at her. This was the daughter for whom I had packed lunches, whose teenage tears I had secretly comforted while pretending not to notice. The mother who left her little son with me every Tuesday for 2 years while she attended art classes that were really therapy sessions, she was too proud to admit. "I will make you a different offer," I said. "I will sell you the vineyard in Tuscany at fair market value. The money will go into Will's education fund. He already has a fund for graduate school or to start his own business. Yesterday he told me he wants to study sustainable architecture." Something shifted in her face, perhaps surprised that I knew that about her son. I continued. "I will also keep you on the board of the community center project. Jonathan would have wanted his legacy to include you. The firm stays with me." She looked at her water glass. "You were never stupid, were you? Always watching, always knowing more than you let on." "I had to be. You made sure of that. And if I try to turn the partners against you, I will remind them that I managed Father's files for 30 years, that I negotiated 3 contracts while he was in the hospital, that Patricia will confirm that I know every active project intimately." "Did you plan this somehow?" she asked. "Your father planned it," I said truthfully. "I just survived long enough to execute it." We sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Lauren reached into her bag and pulled out a small object wrapped in tissue paper. This was my mother's cameo. "Father gave it to me when I was 16. I have worn it on every important day since." She slowly unwrapped it. "The day I told him I was engaged, I wore it. The day Will was born. Today." She placed it on the table between us. "She would have hated you for taking her place." "I never took her place," I said gently. "She left a void that had to be filled differently. Your father found someone who walked quietly where she had stepped boldly." "God, even now you are unbearably reserved," she said, but there was less sharpness in it. "Fine. The vineyard for Will's fund, a seat on the community center board, and Thanksgiving dinner here with you as host, if you can bear to have me at your table." It was the closest she had ever come to acknowledging the dinners where she had criticized my cooking while taking second helpings. "I can bear it," I said. She gathered her things, pausing at the edge of the table. "Will is right to like you. I see that now. That does not mean I have to." "No," I nodded. "You do not." As she left, I sat with my water, looking out at the harbor through the rain-streaked windows. The cameo was still on the table. Lauren had left it behind, like so many conversations we never finished. I picked it up, examining the delicate profile carved into the pink stone. Jonathan's first wife smiled eternally in miniature, just like Lauren's memory of her, frozen in perfection. I carefully rewrapped it and put it in my bag. Perhaps one day, in a moment none of us planned, I would find a way to return it to her, without the feeling of winning or losing. Back in the office, I saw that our Patricia had organized the afternoon meetings. By 10 o'clock, I had signed my first contract as president of Henry Weissman and partner. The partners were polite, professional, and obviously surprised by my understanding of structural details. "Jonathan always said you had a good eye for his work," Mr. Robinson remarked as he left. "He just never mentioned that you could read blueprints like an engineer." "It interested me," I replied, "but understanding it would have meant seeing me differently." Robinson nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes what we choose not to see says more about us than about them. The night found me alone in a Jonathan's aunt's house, where I finally truly wept. Not for the Jonathan's aunt's death, which I had secretly mourned for months as his illness progressed, but for the 30 years of half-hearted acknowledgment, for the love that was given but not defended, for the place that was earned but never granted. I sat at his drafting table, looking at the plans for the community center. Tomorrow I would call the contractors and tell them to begin the second phase. It would have art spaces for classes like the ones Lauren pretended to attend, meeting rooms to bridge differences instead of deepening them, a library to share stories without shadows. The moon rose full and bright over the harbor. Through the window, I saw its reflection, creating that silver path again. Tonight I understood that I had been traveling on that path all those years. Not to Jonathan's shore, but to my own island of strength, quietly built underwater while everyone watched the surface. My legacy was not just property in the firm. It was the permission to finally fully inhabit my own life, to wake up tomorrow, not as the woman he endured, but as the one who prevailed, transforming quiet service into visible leadership, hidden knowledge into open authority. The cameo lay on my desk next to a photo of Will as a baby, mother and son separated by misunderstandings. Both worthy of the truth. Perhaps that would be my greatest project, not building bridges of brick and concrete, but of forgiveness and acknowledgement. But that work could wait. Tonight, for the first time in 30 years, I went to sleep in a house that was entirely, legally, and undeniably mine. 6 months after Jonathan's funeral, I sat in his office, now mine, and noticed that I had stopped thinking of him as Jonathan, my husband, and begun to remember him as Jonathan, the architect. The distinction felt important. Patricia knocked on the door and came in with the day's mail. Between architectural magazines and contract proposals was a cream-colored envelope with Will's return address in Boston. "Dear Eleanor," he wrote, "I passed the architecture exam last week." Mom drove up to celebrate. It was the first time she visited me at school. She stayed for dinner and asked about my work on sustainable community spaces. Progress, perhaps. The cameo you sent helped. She wore it at my graduation. I accepted a junior position at Ma Chen & Partnered in a New York mine, close enough to visit, far enough to build something of my own, just like you are doing. Willa signed off, and I remembered teaching him to write his name at my kitchen table when Lauren was too overwhelmed to do it herself. He was now someone who understood that buildings were not just structures, but stories made tangible. The community center opened last month. I had preserved Jonathan's vision, but added elements he would have been too cautious to incorporate. A workshop space for formerly incarcerated individuals learning a trade, a commercial kitchen for cooking classes run by immigrant families. At the dedication ceremony, Lauren surprised everyone, including herself, I suspect, with a brief speech acknowledging my role as the silent but persistent champion of the project. A knock interrupted my thoughts. Sigrid poked her head in the door. "Thought you would want a coffee before the Stephenson meeting." She carried 2 mugs and sat comfortably on the visitor's chair. "How are the lilies doing?" I smiled. The lily bed was my small rebellion. Where Lauren once insisted on precise rows of roses, white lilies now bloomed freely. "Wild but beautiful, like you," Sigrid Hesse remarked. 6 months of challenging expectations. I barely recognize you." "Perhaps you know me better than I knew myself," I said. The meeting with the Stephens had filled my afternoon. A young couple who wanted to build their first house with sustainable materials. As I sketched initial ideas, I surprised myself by making notes with gestures that mirrored Jonathan's Kwanai's hand movements. Some inheritances lived on in muscle memory. By 5 o'clock, the office was empty. I stayed late to finalize documents, something I had done countless times as Jonathan's wife. But now I signed my own name with bold strokes, without the cautious precision that once hid my presence. It began to rain as I locked the office, creating musical harmonies on the metal staircase. In my car, I paused before starting the engine, watching the water cascade over the windshield. The cemetery was 3 blocks away. 10 minutes later, I stood in a Jonathan's grave with a single white lily. This time no elaborate bouquet, but a perfect flower. His tombstone was simple. Jonathan Weissman, architect, father, husband, built with vision and love. I placed the lily at its base and spoke aloud for the first time since the funeral. You knew. 3 weeks before you died, you knew. Even then, you could not say to my face what you wrote in that letter. But you did what counted. You wrote it down. The rain turned to mist. I do not know yet if I forgive you for the 30 years of silence, but I thank you for finding your voice before it was too late. Lauren's car appeared at the cemetery entrance. She approached slowly, hesitantly, holding a bouquet of roses. We had not planned to meet here, but grief does not keep to schedules. We stood silently next to each other before she spoke. The first month I came every week. The first week every day. I know, I said. The gardener told me? She looked at me surprised. He asked about me. I asked about the lilies I left at the gate. He mentioned you brought sunflowers, your mother's favorite flowers. Lilies make me nervous. They smell like a hospital. For me, they smell like new beginnings. We laid our flowers down together. Lauren's red vibrant roses and my single pure lily. Somehow they belonged next to each other. The house? She asked as we walked toward our cars. Still standing? You can stop by any time. The firm? Profitable. Your father would be proud of how we have modernized without abandoning his standards. And you? I am learning to take up space. She almost smiled. God knows there is enough of it. This house always seemed too small for you when you were trying to make yourself smaller. In my car, I turned around. Do you know what I finally understand? You did not protect your mother's memory by keeping me away. You protected yourself from the realization that your father could love fully again. Perhaps, she said, pulling her coat tighter against the evening chill. Perhaps I protected myself from seeing how little I had earned my place while watching you earn yours every day. It was the most honest sentence she had ever spoken to me. Thanksgiving is next month, I said. I am making my mother's stuffing recipe, the one you always found too dry. Is it probably still? Probably, but Willie will eat 3 servings and pretend it is perfect. She laughed, a genuine laugh, not the practiced societal tones I had heard for 30 years. He inherited that from you, the diplomacy. I shook my head. He inherited it from understanding that family is more complicated than blood, something I learned by watching you struggle with it. We said our goodbyes without hugs or promises, but as I drove home, to my house, my success, my space, I felt lighter than I had in years. The revenge everyone expected had not happened. Instead, something quieter had emerged, an understanding, however fragile. That night, I sat on the glassed-in terrace where Jonathan Yu had told me he was a coward. Now his words resonated differently. I will not let you face that fear alone. He had meant not Lauren. The struggle for the inheritance, the questions of belonging, but he had given me something more valuable than money or property. He had given me the permission to fully stand in my own light. The moon rose over the harbor again, painting its silver path on the dark water. I still owned the country house where this chapter began, my retreat before I married Jonathan. Tomorrow I would visit it, perhaps decide whether to keep it as a memory or sell it as an unnecessary anchor. But tonight, in this house that finally truly belonged to me, I allowed myself to dream of future chapters. Willana, visiting with his own designs. Sigrid, stopping by late for a coffee. Lauren occasionally joining us for festive dinners where all seats at the table were equal. I took off my wedding ring and examined its worn surface in the lamplight. 30 years of wearing it had left a slight mark on my finger, a lasting reminder that would not quickly fade. Now I understood that some marks should remain. The ring joined the cameo in my jewelry box, artifacts of a complicated story that no longer defined my future. Outside, the rain continued its gentle percussion, cleansing the world and promising the possibilities of tomorrow. In the morning, I would wake up as Eleanor Weissman, widow of an architect, yes, but also entrepreneur, community leader, a woman who had finally learned that quiet strength does not need invisibility to survive. My legacy was more than money. It was the realization that I always had the power to claim my place. I just needed someone else's permission to see it, and perhaps that was Jonathan's. Greatest gift, not the will that redistributed the wealth, but the acknowledgment that allowed me to redistribute my own worth. My last thought before sleep took me was this: some inheritances come wrapped in pain, but they open into freedom. And freedom, once recognized, creates its own legacy. The harbor whispered its ancient rhythms at my window as I fell asleep, finally at peace in a bed that was always mine, in a house that now legally proved it, in a life I had quietly earned day by day, over 30 years. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, as always, but I would face them as myself, fully present, no longer the woman who loved from the shadows, but the one who had learned that true inheritance is not passed down through blood or legal documents. It is fought for moment by moment with the courage to fully occupy one's own space, and that legacy, once accepted, can never be contested or taken. If you like my stories, do not forget to subscribe to my channel and like the video. You can support me financially so I can write more stories by sending me donations with a big thank you. Thank you very much.